Hello, everybody. Greetings and welcome to this AMCD webinar brought to you with sponsorship and thanks to the generous collaboration of the American Counseling Association, the Association for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Issues in Counseling, the Association for Spiritual, Ethical, and Religious Values in Counseling, and the Tennessee Counseling Association. Just a quick overview of what we're going to be doing today. Our main charge is to discuss Tennessee House Bill 1840 and its implications for counseling, clients, and really what should be our professional response. Just a real quick webinar etiquette. If you are not one of our invited speakers, we do ask that you do mute your microphone to reduce any background noise. Thank you very much. Allow me to introduce our speakers, and I'm going to ask that they give a brief 30-second intro into themselves and talk a bit about the organization they are representing. Let's go in alphabetical order, if that's okay. We'll start off with Stephanie Daly. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you everyone for having me. My name is Dr. Stephanie Daly. I'm an assistant professor of counseling at Argosy University, Washington, D.C. Clinically, my background is in community counseling, specifically crisis counseling and working with trauma-related disorders, adults. I also have served for many years as a disaster mental health responder and an instructor for the American Red Cross. My research focus is on the ethical integration of religion and spirituality into counseling, religious and spiritual assessment in counseling, and more recently in the last couple of years, strategies to assist counselors who are faced with values conflicts. I am the incoming president of the Association of Spiritual, Ethical, Religious Values in Counseling, or ASERVIC, if you will, and I'm here today to represent ASERVIC.
Thank you very much, Audrey, and thank you for being with us. Audrey, Elian, may I have you jump in and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Dr. Audrey Elian, and I am the president of the Tennessee Counseling Association, past president of the West Tennessee Counseling Association, and my background is a mental health clinician for Shelby County Schools. In the past, I've served as a school psychologist where I've worked with pre-K through 12th grade students. I've also worked on university and college campuses. I'm an adjunct professor at Memphis College of Arts. And my research interest has been in perfectionism and racial identity development along with self-esteem. This has been a very interesting year for me as president, and I am so excited that I've had the opportunity to collaborate with so many different divisions within ACA, and I'm glad to be a part of this webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Audrey. And now, can we turn it over to Kim Lee Hughes?
Well, good afternoon. I am Kim Lee Hughes. I am an assistant professor at the University of Texas San Antonio, and I'm happy to report I just finished my first year, and so thank you, Carlos. I am here officially representing AMCD, where I serve as the chair for the dance service, as well as a liaison with Algebra Tech. My particular area of interest is working with queer women of color, working with queer families in school settings, and I do research around ethics and standards within the counseling profession. Most notably, I am the network chair for the SACES Division of Ethics and Professional Counsel. So lots of cross-sections I hope to be able to address today, and I'm excited to be a part of the hosting party. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you very much, Kim. It's a pleasure to have you here. Let's go over to Dr. Lynn Lindy.
Hi, I'm Lynn Lindy. I'm the Senior Director of the Section for Counseling at the American Counseling Association. Okay. And it's my pleasure to be part of it. The center is responsible for many of the professional and content areas within the association, so ethics, clinical practice, licensure, and many of the things that are related to what we're going to be talking about today. Part of my involvement in this is because I am with ACA, and partly because I was one of the folks who served on the 2014 task force that revised the ACA Code of Ethics. So I have a very personal relationship with our current Code of Ethics.
Thank you very much, Lynn, and thank you very much for being with us. Can I turn it over to Joffrey and have you introduce yourself?
Yes, happy to. I'm Dr. Joffrey Saprina. I am currently the National Dean for the College of Counseling, Psychology, and Social Sciences for Argosy University. I'm also a member of LGBTQ and a CERVIC currently. I have been a member of AMCD in the past. I have been a private practitioner working in a variety of settings, and my research areas of interest is wellness, LGBT issues, as well as spirituality and addictions.
Well, thank you all again for joining us and being with us in this conversation. I'm going to say let's go ahead and jump into our talk today. I've got a few questions that we've kind of prepared for you all. And maybe I can start off with Audrey and Lynn and have you tell us what exactly is House Bill 1840?
I had the opportunity, Carlos, to send you a copy of the bill. So I think, well, it's now a law. And so I wanted to at least let everybody know what the actual law states. So I'm not sure if you're able to email that to everyone, but I would like to read the first portion of it. Just
Give
for
me
clarification.
1 second, Audrey, and I can share it with the group.
Okay.
There you go. You should be seeing that on your screen now.
Okay. This is the current law that is now legislation that has been listed. And I wanted everybody to see it so that you could see it in writing with all of the amendments. But as it states, no counselor or therapist providing counseling or therapy services shall be required to counsel or serve a client as to goals, outcomes, or behaviors that conflict with the sincerely held principles of the counselor or therapist, provided that the counselor or therapist coordinates a referral of the client to another counselor or therapist who will provide the counseling or therapy. And it goes on from there. And basically, this law only affects those that are in private practice as licensed professional counselors. If you are working in a school setting or a government agency, public, then you are not held by those same standards. Your organization or your job supersedes whatever their governing thing is, or their law will supersede what this law says, especially in terms of your employment. However, if you work for a private institution or one with a religious background, you still have to adhere to what your supervisors or your organization standards are in order to maintain employment.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound or hash.
Again, I'm going to ask folks that if you are not one of our participants, that you do please mute on your end. You'll find that in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. I'm looking at you, Dr. Smith.
Otherwise, just press pound to continue. You are in the Zoom meeting.
All right, I got it for him. Dr. Lindy, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Sure. One of the reasons that ACA became so concerned about this bill and worked so closely with the folks in Tennessee is that the Tennessee State Licensure Board uses the ACA Code of Ethics as its ethical standards. And what this law does is invalidate some of the foundational aspects of the Code of Ethics. For over 35 years, counselors, ACA members, and people who have subscribed to the ACA Code of Ethics have never been allowed to impose their own values on their clients, nor have they been able to discriminate on any basis that is prescribed within Section C5, which is the non-discrimination clause. And what this law does is allow counselors to determine if they choose to work with a client or not. When we revised the 2014 Code of Ethics, there was nothing in there that was new. We clarified what had always been in there, and that client characteristics have never been a reason for referral. The only reasons that a counselor could refer a client were based on the counselor's inability to work with the client, and that has to do with competence. And competence is defined as scope of practice. So what does the credential you hold allow you to do, and can you work with the client? So if the client needs a higher standard of care than you are able to provide, then that is an appropriate referral. Such as, I'm not a marriage and family counselor, I've been working with someone, they now want to enter into family counseling, I can't work with them, that's an appropriate referral. I'm working with someone for who appears to suffer from a depressive state, and they're drinking a lot, but it turns out that they're really a substance abuser, and what they need is a substance abuse counselor. I'm not qualified to handle that. I can refer. So you can refer based on the intervention the client needs. You may not refer because of any client characteristic. So ACA has become very involved in this fight because this goes to the heart of who we are. One of the things that this whole, the situation in Tennessee has really caused is it's really made us look at who we are as a profession and for what do we stand. What do we believe is the right thing to do? We have always put our clients first. And I understand that people are very concerned about how we leave, quote, leave our values at the door, end quote, when we come into a counseling session, but that's part of our training. And that's part of how we train counselors. So the 2014 Code of Ethics really solidified the fact that counseling is all about the client. It's not about us as counselors. We don't put our values as a higher priority than the needs of our clients.
Would anybody else in the panel like to add anything? Otherwise, I'd like to move to our next question.
Yeah, my only addition is like Linda was saying, I think it's a very slippery slope here when they start wanting to make exceptions for certain characteristics or issues such as religion, that it's very difficult for us to segment some piece of ourselves out and avoid bias according to other characteristics, values, or beliefs as well.
The other issue with this particular law is it allows counselors to refuse to see a client on any basis. So it's a particularly slippery slope because I believe I can't work with you. And so that rolls back 60 years of civil rights for us.
And I agree with Lynn. I think by stating personally held beliefs, that opens the door up for any belief, any moral, ethical views that are personal to that particular clinician, which then may potentially ostracize or prevent them from working with clients that may actually need the services. Within the law, it states that you can refer unless the client is in imminent danger. However, it leaves the door open because you won't know if they're in imminent danger initially when they come in. And so it is that slippery slope. How do you determine what that is, especially if the client isn't forthcoming during that initial assessment?
And this is really leading us to our next question. And we'll start by thinking about Tennessee in specific. But how will this bill impact both counselors and clients in Tennessee?
Well, as was just stated, there's...
Go ahead.
I was going to say, as was just stated, there's a tremendous potential to do harm because very often there are not issues or characteristics that may come up in initial settings or in an initial presentation of a presenting issue. And so for individuals to be able to make carte blanche referrals, or what are they going to do when they've been working with somebody for 6 months and have a very good working relationship, and all of a sudden it comes up that they want to date someone of the same sex or gender. And then all of a sudden the counselor says, oops, nope, that's against my religious beliefs. Now I have to get rid of you. And I think that's some of the flaw in the thinking, in the idea that we will automatically know up front all the characteristics to which we might have some issues or values conflict.
We're also concerned that according to the federal government, so many areas of Tennessee are underserved by mental health providers. And if I'm the only mental health provider within 150 miles and I refuse to see you, it's fine for me to refer you to someone else. But what if you lack the ability to go see someone else? So we're concerned about our most vulnerable populations being left unserved by this bill, this law.
I agree.
Or to add to that.
Oh, I don't think that the legislators really thought that out clearly, because we have quite a few rural areas. And so with those clients, if they're suicidal, homicidal, or anything else, how will they be able to be served if there is no clinician available in that immediate area? Then by law, okay, the clinician is cleared, but your moral and ethical responsibility as a person, as a citizen, to provide those services to someone that's in need, that goes into question.
And no one has stated anything about insurance reimbursement either. They may have, one counselor in the area, but the next counselor who accepts that same insurance reimbursement may be 300, 400 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
And really, what this law has, what we've seen, is that it's calling counselors to necessitate an understanding of what their own personal value system is, what their beliefs are, what their goals are. It's pushing us to really look at, if we experience dissonance within the counselor-client relationship, how do we approach this? It's really bringing us to a point of education about what are, as a counselor, in Tennessee or nationally, throughout, any counselor within the profession, what are my belief systems, and how do I honor my own belief system while also allowing the client to have autonomy, making sure that I do not impose my own value system, that I don't, just like we say to our students, we don't give advice to clients. We don't impose our own value system, but what does that look like? And that's really what this is calling into question for all of us as a profession.
Well, the other aspect that I have not heard discussed, which gets to a foundation of counseling, like Lynn was talking about, is that research actually supports that we have the most beneficial results with the differences between our perspectives between the counselor and counselee. And this is promoting relationships, counseling relationships that would be based more on similarity than difference. And so I have to question what would be the benefits of that counseling relationship, or have they negated many of the benefits of that counseling relationship as a result of that kind of foundational paradigm shift of thinking or perspective?
And this is jumping ahead just slightly, but this point that's being brought up is this around this notion of being able to bracket strongly held beliefs. As counselors, one, are we ever able to bracket those strongly held beliefs? And if so, how do we go about doing that?
So I kind of want to start in on this one, Carlos. The idea of bracketing, and I'm coming from a researcher standpoint perhaps, I think is always difficult, because what we're in essence saying is don't work on broadening your growing edges, work on ways to kind of file them down in particular situations. And I think that that's already maybe a point of error. When we think about our own development as a profession, I don't know that you really can bracket your differences. And I think your clients are certainly savvy enough, especially in sensitive situations, to know that you're maybe hiding pieces of yourself from them. So Dahlberg talks about broadly, and I think I like that concept better. This idea that you broaden your understanding around difference and not simply bracket what you don't feel comfortable with. So I think this continuing education piece is fundamental, but I think it has to be very pointed. I know most states require ethics training and so many hours of ethics, but are we requiring the same kind of continuing training around diversity issues, around multiculturalism, around advocacy? Because I think we as professionals have to grow our own edges and not really anticipate that our clients are going to fit into our concepts or that we're going to be able to bracket our differences.
I don't think the Code of Ethics asks us to bracket our differences. And I love your concept of broadening. I think what it asks us to do is to really know who we are, to embrace who we are, but to understand how we see the world. And as we work with our clients, part of our task is to see the world through their eyes. So we need to be able to understand how our view of the world is hindering us from seeing the world as they see it. And that's also part of supervision and consultation and all of those other things that we as professional counselors do so that we can be the most effective with our clients.
And I think also just thinking about Counseling 101, building that rapport, having that relationship with that client. And I think for me, as the clinician, it's important that I seek and work with clients where they are, no matter what their differences are, no matter what their challenges are. That's why I came into this profession to begin with. And if I didn't want to do that, then maybe I need to rethink why I came into the profession, or if I need to do something different. And I think many of us during some of our programs, we were also clients at one time, or may still be clients. And as a client, then you may also want to think about, how do I approach someone who may potentially turn me away because they don't agree with my beliefs or my background or my race or my gender? That says a lot to me, and I'm really concerned about the profession overall if we don't stand together and unite like we are and try to combat this as much as possible.
I think that education is critical here. That historically, the issues of values and our belief system, we've really avoided talking about it within the counseling profession. If you look back into our literature, there are times where it says counseling is value-free. Well, we now have grown, and we know that counseling is not value-free. We are not value-free. We are not expected to be value-free. Sometimes our values and our beliefs are actually what makes us really great counselors and what might have even brought us into the profession. But that's our personal stance. In terms of educating on counseling skills, opening up the conversation, which we're doing in our profession, of what do we do when we're experiencing dissonance or we're experiencing a values conflict. How are we going to approach this? And it starts way before we're even seeing clients. It starts in our counselor education programs. All throughout our code of ethics, all throughout our literature, it talks about being aware of who we are as individuals. For some of us, most of us, we hold some things pretty strong and pretty tight. And that makes us who we are. So learning about bracketing, bridling, opening up our worldview, understanding that at the end of the day, it's all about client welfare, not harming the client. Mm-hmm. And in that process, what are our personal values and what are our professional values? And continuing the journey, it is a long journey, continuing the journey of as we grow as individuals and as we grow as professionals, how do we keep those in alignment with the values of our profession and our obligation for client welfare? It's a complex task.
When I teach multiculturalism, I always approach this kind of from two different perspectives. One is identity development, where many of the identity development models have a we versus them stage early on in development. And as you progress, you get more to a we and them stage. And so I think that's what we're talking about here, is not so much that you are giving up yourself or your values or your beliefs, but you're making room for theirs. And it doesn't mean you have to adopt them or you have to take them on, but you can understand that they can coexist and be different from each other, and neither one of you be threatened. And I think that's a paradigm that is threatened here, where they're encouraging individuals to stay in a dichotomous perspective of a we versus them, which could be quite problematic. And the other one that concerns me is the growth factor for counselors and clients. I remember Katarina Chang, you will welcome this, with Ken Matheny's Hold Tentative Convictions, where he said we all should have values and beliefs and convictions, but they need to be open to hear additional information for growth. And that's what we're expecting of our clients, is that they be open to growth. For them to be open to growth, we have to be open to other worldviews, other perspectives. Once again, not that we need to adopt them, but we need to be able to hear them and have the dialogue.
I agree, Jeff. And just with teaching ed psych and multicultural counseling, we always stress that phase where you have that internalization. It's where you know where you are and how you identify, but you're able to also be accepting and inclusive of all others and their perspective viewpoints. And I think that's very important when we're thinking about our clients and people that we're serving, and to be cognizant of the fact that they may not agree with me, or they may hold different opinions about different things. But how do I take that? How do I learn from that? How do I get them to grow, but also grow myself as a clinician and realize that I may have some biases too, and I need to be aware of that, and I need to learn those ways of how to work within those biases to broaden that perspective, and so that way I can better serve and meet the needs of the clients.
So this kind of is leading into, I think, what is another important question around this. In thinking about this bill in Tennessee, you all have mentioned counselor education. How does the passing of this bill impact counselor education, not only in Tennessee, but potentially nationally?
I think it poses some tremendous dilemmas. Although Audrey mentioned at the beginning, when she was talking about the bill, that it doesn't specifically reference counselor education programs. Counselor education programs still send their students into placements for clinical practice. And I can see down the road where, well, this year, where there will be some inherent conflicts between the placements where students are and their site supervisors potentially, and what students are learning in programs. And I know that Vanderbilt, for example, said on CESNET that they're going to continue to uphold the ACA Code of Ethics. And I think many of the counselor ed programs will. But what happens when students go into workplace settings where that's not the case? And I applaud all of the counselor educators who are going to have to deal with that this year, because that's going to be a struggle.
Well, and I see the potential for some of the students coming back and saying, see, according to this law, I don't have to learn this, or I don't have to work from this perspective in the program, the counselor education program. And then we have a dilemma now for the counselor educator, because they've been taught this gatekeeping role based on the ACA Code of Ethics, and they have a student very blatantly saying, well, when I get out of here, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to uphold the ACA Code of Ethics, and I'm going to uphold the law.
Well, it's even a little worse, too, because so many of the programs use the ACA Code of Ethics.
Yes.
Secret programs. And so therefore, the expectation is that students will abide by the Code of Ethics and not discriminate and work with all clients. And so, as you said, Jeff, what happens when students say, not going to do it?
Well, I think one of the conversations we've had here in Tennessee with some of our members who are parts of UT and also the University of Memphis, they've stressed that, you know, part of their program and their guidelines and being accepted into the program is that they adhere to the ACA Code of Ethics. And so you have already agreed to do this. And so, I mean, to me, if you want to be a part of this program and you want to graduate, you will have to follow that. However, like you say, legally, it is not a part, but as a student, you are not yet licensed. And therefore, you're still in training and you still have to learn how to deal with various issues or presenting problems that clients may face. And so it is a challenge, but I think that's also something for the students to think about if this is a profession that they want to be a part of, knowing that these standards are there. Regardless to what the law said, the standards are still there.
And I think that's a great point, Audrey. As we talk about in the section that talks about orientation, I think, and I've been at ACA a little less than a year, and prior to that I was in counselor ed, and I know we would do our annual orientation for students and sort of skim through some of those things. But I think things like really helping students understand the expectations of the profession they're choosing and what that means and what does abiding by the Code of Ethics mean is going to take on increasing importance, and it needs to be thoughtful. And perhaps not everybody wants to be part of a profession that holds these beliefs in common, and that's okay. But this is what we as a profession have said we believe and we're going to uphold, and the expectation is our students will do that as well.
It calls into, oh, Kim, go ahead.
Okay, so just a slight piece about kind of infusing these ideas through all of our course content. I know we constantly talk about this idea of infusing, ideas into our intro courses or into our ethics courses. You know, I teach theories and skills, and I think it's just as important to be sure that multiculturalism and social justice and advocacy are a piece of what we're doing from day one in every course that we're in. So it's not in pockets, it's just infused in the way that we do each of our pedagogical duties. And so there's never a conversation or a piece that you can get away from who we are. And that's the way that I was educated at the University of Georgia and at Georgia State. And I feel like that's the professional that I've become. And so I've had to grow and develop, but I don't think of myself as being the same person with the same beliefs that I started this master's program back in 2006. So I do think it's incumbent upon us to infuse all of our programs with these standards and not just particular courses.
So did you see the comment by Scarborough on the chat? Says at East Tennessee State, we've already had a student from another state ask if she could transfer to the program because of the new law, and she does not, so she won't have to counsel LGBTQ clients.
Wow. There you go.
We're already seeing some ramifications within the educational system.
I believe Stephanie's been trying to jump in. Stephanie, can you go ahead?
Sure. I think it calls into a critical need for us to create a very safe place for students, practicing counselors, supervisors, counselor educators, for all of us as a profession to safely talk about any issues we're experiencing, values conflicts we're experiencing, impasses we're experiencing, and be able to work within the solution. Be able to educate individuals on things that they can do, bracketing, exploration, journeys. I don't think bracketing is just something, it's just a skill that you apply, with one client in one particular session. bracketing is something, or bridling, or whatever the skill is that resonates with you, that you've learned about, that you hear and you can apply, that we create a safe place for exploration of this. And we're getting into a very absolute discussion about yes or no, and there's some space in here to begin to educate and talk about this as a profession. Yes, at one end, we absolutely have our code of ethics, which we do have to abide by. Well, it's our guidelines that we abide by. But there needs to be space for education and supervision and training and growth. Mm-hmm. And I'll say it again, all with the client welfare, not harming the client at the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And Stephanie, I think it is so important that very often we know bias comes out of ignorance. Mm-hmm. And so how do we educate folks to help them to address or overcome the bias?
Well, and also creating, again, a safe place where folks can talk about their values. I mean, when I talk to some individuals, they'll say, I feel like whenever I bring this up in the classroom or in supervision, that someone's telling me that, and this is an exact quote, I'm reading the Bible wrong, or that my family and my faith-based network is telling me something that's wrong, and there's this dissonance. And so creating a space where individuals can talk about this and how they fit into the profession.
Can I interject for a moment?
Please.
I was looking at, and this goes in line with what you're saying, Stephanie. We have someone online, Arjo, who talked about being able to teach professional school counselors. And one of the things that we've done here in Memphis is not only going to the classrooms of those in high school, but also within the university settings to talk about the implications that not educating others about this law and about how it will impact students is really serving a disservice to everyone. One thing that we talked about was a lot of times school counselors are in a position where they're working with a student, and a lot of times they have to refer the students out for different services. And one of the things that came up in the discussion was, how will I know whether or not this person who has a private practice is abiding by this law or is abiding by the ACA Code of Ethics? And that was such an excellent question. And they don't know. But I think that's a part of the educational system, being able to teach this in a myriad of places, not only at the high school level, but also the college level, but also talking to counselors during their district learning day, being able to present these topics in a professional way so that way people will learn, also at conferences, at their training institutes, so that way they can be informed too and be able to inform the clients that this may potentially be something that they'll be faced with, having to make that decision or what's going on. And I think for us, what we've seen is a lot of clients now that are asking, do you abide by this law or do you abide by the Code of Ethics? And there have been some counselors that have had to say, well, I abide by the Code of Ethics and I will be able to serve you. And so that's the part that, I think TCA is looking at. How do we disseminate that information? How possibly do we get that information out to potential clients and current clients so that way they can be more informed and be able to decide who they choose to see as their clinician?
So can I jump in here? Because we did have a question from the chat that kind of related to this particular point and to the point that kind of Audrey's brought up. Would it be sufficient for a practitioner to state in their informed consent, these are my sincerely held beliefs and I will not serve a client of X, Y, and Z background?
I think it goes back to not speaking in absolutes. I'm not concerned about the student or the supervisee or an individual that comes and says, I'm having some problems, I'm afraid to talk about this. individuals that are teachable. A personal mantra of mine is I like to always remain teachable. So what I would want to do is explore those absolutes, explore that impasse, and there's some excellent literature out there. Explore when you're dealing with a values-based conflict, there are some ethical decision-making models out there. I'm not going to plug anybody, Cosit and Hurley, but I'm not, there are some really great ethical decision-making models out there. So whenever someone says no, never, that is a concern. But again, safe space. Let's talk about this. Let's engage.
Well, and to play off of that, it would be a concern for me, not that you couldn't do it, but if I was looking for a counselor and I saw that on their web page, as they were saying, I don't see these people, or I don't see this condition, or I don't see this circumstance, that to me would be a red flag to say that I wouldn't want to see them about anything. But just once again, what Stephanie was saying about those absolutes that some individuals come into, often in classes, I'm sure a lot of you have heard this in counselor education, they'll say the last person I want to work with is a sex offender. And for that, I will tell them about one of the clients I had who was a 19-year-old young man who'd been dating a girl who was 16 for the last 4 years, and with the blessing of their parents, and they were ready to get married and engaged for married, and he was in the Army. And the Army found some emails he had sent between him and his girlfriend and discovered that they had slept together. And so it gave them a dishonorable discharge, and then he was civilly charged, and he became a registered sex offender. So if you were counseling that client, would you automatically have said, no, I'm not going to work with you because you're a sex offender? Or when you found out some of the circumstances of that, might you reconsider and have some shades of gray in it? And I think it's going to be similar with a lot of the other ones, where if we have anyone who is taking that black and white perspective, that hard yes, no, good, bad, right, wrong perspective, I think that points to a poor counselor.
Well, when thinking about, as you look, if you're a client, you are going on to the websites, you're looking, trying to find a clinician, they usually will list the populations that they serve or their areas of expertise. So I really think it's up to that particular clinician as to whether or not they want to list those things, but to also think about this may also hurt your livelihood or your business or help, depending on the type of clients that you're looking for. But I like what you've said as far as how do you know what issues this person is faced with? Because if you know automatically, just like you said, if they're a sex offender, okay, but there could be a lot of gray areas within that. And so by you just shutting the door, thinking it's just a black or white issue, then you're really hindering yourself from not having the opportunity to get to know their client, help their client through their process, and also to see how everything is not black or white. There are a lot of gray areas, and it takes time to get to know their client as opposed to just that initial assessment. You need a little bit more time to work with them to really, be critically or culturally competent to take everything into account before you just refer to someone else.
But Audrey, and thank you, both of you, therein lies the rub, where it does take, multiple sessions in order to really get to know the client. And this is something that's frequently seen, is that these value-based issues are not really at the initial intake.
Exactly.
Many times, they're in the fourth session or the fifth session where you find something. So it again goes back to really focusing on how do we deal with dissonance between the counselor and the client. Maybe dissonance isn't the right word. Language is very important in these discussions. So maybe it's a values conflict. Maybe it's countertransference, but really focusing on these issues, especially when it relates to very intimate and personal issues like religious and spiritual issues. If you look at the literature, the field is really avoided, depending on what camp, either avoided or has a dearth of information about integrating spirituality into religion and counseling. Freud and some counseling theorist, Ellis, had said, no, it doesn't belong. It's different. Mm-hmm. We've moved into it being a critical part of the counseling process, especially for meeting strength-based counseling goals. Mm. So I think if it's not that one client, it's going to be another client. So we really have to focus on how to teach people how to effectively deal with these issues, not when they come up, but beforehand.
Right.
Well, I think that's part of our educational process, is how do we challenge the students so that they become aware of these potential conflicts, mm-hmm. and have a mechanism by which they might negotiate them.
Mm-hmm. So more preventative and interventive type of stance, as opposed to reactive.
Yes.
After something has already occurred.
And I would really, I'm sorry. And good supervision is critical as we are training students to help them work through these and look at these issues at a deeper level than they might at first see them.
I think we're focusing quite a bit on, ways to train our students, and I think that's a valid conversation for sure. But what we're dealing with now in Tennessee is the idea that people who are already in practice have the potentiality of doing harm to potential clients. And so it's not so much the students that we're educating, within our various programs. It's those practitioners who've already come through the system at some point and for whatever reason missed that critical piece and are now, willing to practice in sanctions against our code. And so how do we, bring in individuals who are already in practice into this idea and synergy that we're sharing and that we're, passing on to our students? How do we bring continuing education into this conversation in a meaningful way to maybe change some of the current practices? And I think that that's maybe an urgent piece now. Like, what do we do for those practitioners who are taking this as an advantage to work outside of our code?
Do you get any sense of what the scope of the issue is? I mean, the bill basically allows discrimination, but are you getting any kind of anecdotal information about how many practicing counselors, LPCs, are saying, oh, good, now I don't have to work with certain groups?
I don't have any statistics on that. That's something we're trying to see if we can find out. What we have been able to surmise is that most of the ones that are adhering to the law are not members of TCA or ACA.
But they're licensed.
But they are licensed. And so with that, one thing that we talked about was potentially going to the conferences, if they're actively going to the conferences and presenting a professional development piece so that we can provide a CU, but that we bring up these topics, especially within the ethics, and especially within the AMCD, and also within the religious organizations and divisions as well. So that way these things can be discussed. But that's our only avenue as of yet that we've come up with, but we are open to other areas. So I am really here today to try to get you all to assist me in that, including all of the ones that's on this call, to let us know some ideas and strategies that TCA, along with other states, can use, because it's not just going to end here with Tennessee. This is something I think that's going to continue throughout the nation.
I think this has really crystallized a conversation that we all need to have, and it's not just Tennessee. I want to make one comment before we transition, and that is, it may be legal in Tennessee for LPCs to discriminate based on personal values and principles and beliefs, but it is still unethical.
Exactly.
And if they are an ACA member, they can be brought up on ethics charges. And I'm sure Stephanie's thankful that she's transitioning off the ethics committee, because we can't figure out if we're going to be overrun with complaints or not. But ACA is very committed to accepting all valid complaints and working through them, because this is our code of ethics, and just because it's legal does not make it ethical, and we're not changing our standards.
Well, I think it's also important, because I think you skipped over that question on the agenda that you had sent us, that there are 15 states that already have laws related to conscience laws that give people the right to refuse service to individuals who, based on religious beliefs. So it's not that this is a unique law. What makes this more unique is targeting specifically ACA code of ethics rather than a big, broad, general law like the rest of them are. And that there's also 11 other states that have current legislation they're trying to push through. Some that have presented it and it's already been blocked, and they're trying to rework it to get something that is sent through. So I think this is a kind of reaction or retaliation in part because of the legalized gay marriage. And so it's something we need to look at. And when it comes to kind of turning the tide for individuals who are practitioners out there, unfortunately, a lot of things like this webinar require that someone voluntarily participate. And individuals that are going to be advocates of this kind of law and who want to practice it and use it are not likely to attend to something like this to have an open discussion or dialogue. So I think it's going to be really responsive on the colleagues of that individual out there in the state, within their practice or their area, or collaborators or something, for them to offer encouragement and education and invitations to webinars such as this, or trainings at the conferences and that kind of thing. I think that kind of grassroots, ground level approach is what's going to be needed if we're going to have a positive impact in the field.
I think we all
Mr. Reeson said,
What?
I think we need to work closely with state licensure boards. Branches and divisions can work very closely with the state licensure boards. So many of the states require an annual ethics training or biannual ethics training for renewal of one's license. And I think that's a wonderful opportunity to have these discussions.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, yeah. And that it purposely be discussed or brought up in those ethical, so many of those continuing ed ethical ones for relicensure in states are so cookie cutter and standardized. Maybe we can encourage them to include some discussions along these lines.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That's critical, because these issues aren't going away.
Right, I agree. Okay, unfortunately, I have really enjoyed all the discussion, but I have to go prepare for another webinar here. This is a terrific discussion, and I encourage everyone to continue it and look at solutions for how do we best proceed to uphold our ACA Code of Ethics. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joffrey, for being with us. You know, one of the last questions I'd like to put out to the panel before we opened up to the group and those in attendance to ask questions is, how do we see this particular law and some of these other laws that Joffrey also mentioned impacting counselors nationwide?
Well, I think a lot of what we have talked about is not only to counselors in Tennessee, but also counselor educators, supervisors nationally. Certainly there is the increase in conscious clause legislation that we are beginning to see. But it also is sparking discussions such as this and education. So, you know, speaking on behalf of a CERVIC, we're going to see more education, more discussion, creation of a safe space for individuals to talk about, you know, how they're going to work through these issues. And I want to refrain from absolute or polarizing language. You know, I don't want to enter into a discussion where someone's values are considered a bias. Let's open a safe space to talk about this. And educate individuals on what they can do. So it's really a call for the entire profession to begin to address something that we've required for a very long time. Self-awareness, the exploration of our values, how we deal with differences, what discrimination is, what it isn't, what appropriate referral is, what abandonment is, all these major ethical issues are now very real. And we have to be able to educate and have open, non-absolute, non-polarizing discussions about these things within our membership, our divisions, our branches.
Stephanie is so on target with her comments. One of the things that I've done over the last couple of weeks is to go back, starting with the 1961 Code of Ethics, ethical standards, and look at our evolution and where we have come and how they have changed. And of course, our codes of ethics are a reflection of the society at the time they're written. In 1961, we didn't even refer to women. Counselors were referred to as men. And it was very gender specific. And so the conversations we're having now and the things that are captured in our code of ethics are so far advanced from where we were when we began as a profession. And every crisis brings along an opportunity. And I think this is just such an incredible opportunity for us to really take a look at how we're evolving, to reaffirm those principles to which we adhere, the things that we believe are foundational to our profession, and to have these open discussions. Because as we continue to change and society continues to change, the conversations aren't going to get easier. The conversations are going to become more complex as more issues come forth and things change. And I think it's important for us to be open to those conversations and have that be the norm, that that's how we're going to move forward.
I agree with the ladies most wholeheartedly that discourse is essential to us moving forward. Mm-hmm. And as a recent graduate student, I want to kind of echo that in addition to the conversations, we're really also looking for some change in policy, some change in the way that we transactionally do what we do as counselors. So I am a major advocate of us continuing the conversation, and also a social justice agent saying that as we have these conversations, let's put what we find into practice.
All right, as we transition over, I'd like to open up the floor to questions and answers from those in our audience. So if you've got a question, feel free to type that into the group chat, or you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask. And as the moderator, I'm going to privilege myself and allow me to have the first question. And my question is, could national licensure be a way around these types of conscious objection laws and the Tennessee law in specific?
Well, I was just responding to Elaine online. We have sent a request in, and I'm still waiting, and I know that the news outlets, the Tennessean, Channel News 5, they've reached out to hear what stance the licensure board is taking on this, and we're still waiting. But we feel as though they should have a major say in how this will be executed, how they will address the issue as it arises, especially like Kim reported earlier, for the existing practitioners that are out there that have to renew their licenses. How will this new law, what role will this new law have, and how will it be adhered to, considering it's against the ethical guidelines? And so it's sort of up for debate right now, and I'm waiting to hear back. So I'm in ready mode, and I'm waiting to see what they're going to say to address the issue.
Okay, Carlos, can I ask for a clarification of your question, please? Are you suggesting that if Congress passed a national licensure law, that would then negate some of the ability of states to pass these kinds of laws?
I wouldn't say suggest. I would say I'm asking if that's a possibility.
Oh, okay. That's a different question. I got you.
Yeah. That's a great question.
Yeah.
I have never seen Congress pass any kind of law that had to do with credentialing for any profession. That's always been the purview of the states. And logically, it would seem to solve the problem as federal laws, apply to all states. But I'm just sort of sitting here wondering how you could ever make that happen, as tantalizing as that is. And also, without bringing politics into it, Republicans are sort of states' rights, whereas Democrats are more, in general terms, about equality for all. So depending on what happens, I guess, Congress might be more presupposed to look at something like that. But I think that's a hard sell.
I was just
talking aloud.
I was being optimistic. I knew we were going to have a group of counselors together in DC in July and thinking, well, maybe. But
Great idea. How would we make it happen, huh?
But Carlos, I think if each state got together, maybe along with ACA in the ideal world, and they presented it on the national level, then perhaps the conversations could take place. I know there has been some talk about taking this issue to the Supreme Court. Now, I don't know how likely that is, but it was brought up to say that this could possibly be something that they may look into in order to overrule what the states have already imposed.
Thank you. Do we have anybody in the audience that has questions for our esteemed panelists?
Carlos, I'd like to follow up on that and look at, could this not be the theme for the ACA conference that is not going to be in Tennessee, that is going to be somewhere else, and we really focus the conference on advocacy and legal issues and the passing of laws, or I don't know that we ever get a federal law, but that might be a focus for the next ACA conference.
Excellent suggestion. Any responses from the panel?
Well, thanks for that, Mike. I will certainly pass that along. First of all, we don't really do themes anymore, but one of the things that we've talked about for the Institute for Leadership Training this summer is really focusing it around advocacy and leadership and these kinds of issues. So we were thinking about it from more of an ILT perspective than a conference perspective. But certainly we are open to suggestions, and everybody is well aware of the fact that we're going someplace else and why we're going, and there's going to be some recognition of why we've done that, and what exactly that's going to look like, I don't know yet.
I do want to say this, even though it's not in Tennessee, and we are very disappointed it is not in Tennessee, we are very thankful to ACA and Governmental Affairs and all of the divisions for being very supportive to us, Michael. They have been awesome and very supportive as far as coming to potentially our ILT this summer, which is in Tennessee, July the 14th through the 16th. So that we can strengthen our advocacy efforts here in Tennessee, not only on this legislation, but upcoming legislation that we know is coming up in the near future. So I think overall, if we strengthen each branch within each state, I think that's a good way to start. And the more that we know, the more informed we are, so that way we can connect more with our legislators and really let them know what's going on within our individual states and cities, and that this is a concern that we have. And I think the thing that came out of Tennessee was that a lot of legislators did not really talk to ACA and TCA. They talked to outside groups. And I think if they would have spoken to us or worked more with the counseling profession as a whole, then maybe perhaps, regardless of their political backgrounds, they would have been more informed about the implications that this law has on our clients.
To answer the question directly, I think that you're going to see a lot more conversation at this year's conference once I guess we determine where we're going to be conferencing. I do think within the divisional level, working with AMCD, looking at how vocal the various divisions have been on things like ACA Connect or even on CESNET. So I think you're going to see quite a bit of a focus on advocacy and multiculturalism at the divisional level. And so I would say, check in with your current divisions that you're members of and look at ways that we're partnering across this conversation, just like today.
I'm really grateful to have listened, been part of the background for this webinar. I'm Dr. Hattie Eisen in Counselor Education at Freed-Hardeman University. Also President-elect for TAMCET. I am very excited about continuing conversations with whoever regarding this House bill. We are really concerned that there are implications for others to say that I don't want to serve, or I just have an attitude of non-compliance and not serving some students because of their cultural reference or background and other issues. We know that we'll be focusing more in professional development in the local area, in the state of Tennessee, and of course, each opportunity to continue the conversation at the local, regional, state level, conferences, workshop, discussions with families and parents. All of this is very helpful. I think we have to have the right information if we're going to address parents. But most importantly, we are grateful. We are not grateful for this discriminatory bill, but we're grateful that this discriminatory bill it has provoked conversation, which is so in line also to the values, belief systems, attitudes that we find in the multicultural counseling, social justice competencies, which is important training that's needed as well. Thank you so very much. Appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Hattie.
I believe Dr. Sean Smith had a question he wanted to ask. Dr. Smith, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Carlos. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the panel and what's been discussed today. Is there an echo?
Yes.
Yes, on your part.
You may want to turn down your volume if you can.
How's that?
A little bit better. Why don't you just go ahead and ask, and then I'll meet you out afterwards so we get rid of the echo.
Okay. My question is this, and it's specific to, you know what?
I think we've lost Dr. Smith.
We've lost Dr. Smith.
If other folks have any additional questions, we have time for a couple more. And then I'd like to ask the presenters one last question. All right, I'm gonna ask my last question. If you think of something, feel free to type in as we go. But my last question for the panel is, as counselors and as a profession, what can we do to support the Tennessee Counseling Association in specific, and counselors in Tennessee in their advocacy for client rights, and hopefully for overturning this discriminatory bill?
Well, I'll speak on behalf of ACA. I think most of you know that ACA has partnered with the folks in Tennessee from very early on to support the efforts to not get this bill passed, and of course it did, but we provided a lobbyist, and our state level government relations person was practically living in Tennessee, working with the Tennessee Counseling Association and other constituent groups to lobby legislators and to gather information. We hired a PR firm. We're working with another PR firm right now on messaging. We're looking at changing what we're doing for the ILT to provide support. We will continue to work with Tennessee on their needs and to work with their counselors, whether it's providing informational sessions or support. But this really goes to the core of who we are as a profession. And so there may be some things we haven't thought of doing yet. Governing Council made the decision to move the conference from Nashville very deliberatively, as I think you all know. And ACA surveyed the membership, and based on everyone's input, made the decision to move. But that should not be taken as a sign that we're leaving the folks in Tennessee and members in Tennessee behind. We will continue to be there to fight the fight with them. And I don't think any of us has figured out what the next steps are regarding this bill, but we're going to figure this out together.
So Carlos, thank you for asking this. And I think the important thing for us to recognize is that not everyone is in support of, fighting this bill. Not everyone out there is in support of, and counselors, professional counselors, of seeing this bill overturned. And, specifically, I have heard there's been a lot of traffic within my inbox and my colleagues about individuals who identify as conservative, as religious conservative, or socially conservative, really feeling that this bill is actually helping clients. So there's a whole different perspective out there. We have to embrace those individuals and hear them. And hear what is it that they need. And in terms of a survey, really opening up the discussion for what do you need? Is it education? Is it an open forum? What information can we provide with you? And I think a lot of it speaks to, we talked a lot about training. We talked a lot about education. We talked a lot about supervision. Speaking to webinars and, literature, information, allowing individuals to have a voice. So what I'm saying is having and opening our minds as well for a discussion and dialogue. And I know that Audrey has gotten a lot of this discussion and probably Lynn too, discussion and dialogue for individuals of where is this an impasse for you? And how can we help you? I think there's always going to be individuals that feel that ACA has abandoned them. There's always going to be individuals that feel like ACA is not doing enough, and all the subsequent divisions and branches. So I think what we need to do is adopt a stance of tolerance. Maybe tolerance isn't the right word. Maybe an open-mindedness. Maybe bridle. But adopting a stance where we can openly hear and we aren't polarized about these issues. So we can remain teachable and open a space for dialogue of what our members need.
I agree with Stephanie, just to have a atmosphere of, maybe the word is inclusivity, where if you're not a member or if this is something you don't agree with, voice your opinions. Join the divisions, join the chapters, join the branches. Let us know how you feel. So that way we can make a more concerted effort when we're going out to advocate on behalf of the members. We know how you feel, because we don't want to negate anyone's feeling or leave anyone out. We want to be able to appreciate, like we said earlier, all of the differences that we have, but also recognize the similarities. And our ultimate goal is to meet the needs of the clients that we serve. And so whatever way you can assist in doing that, that's what I want. That's what we want.
I just want to mention that one of the things ACA did was create a dedicated telephone line and an email address called My Voice. You can email myvoice@counseling.org or go on the webpage and you can call, it's extension 600, and tell us how you're feeling about all of this and what it is you believe. So we really are seeking input from members, and one of the things that those of us on staff have done is reach out to people who have needed to have that personal contact, and where we needed to go beyond just saying thank you for your response, but having that one-on-one contact with them. So we're always open to hearing from members and from counselors.
Just a small plug for the divisions. We have stated that AMCD was probably the starter of where this webinar sprung from. And as since I was a master's student, I've been a member of ACA and various divisions, and it really is a pretty vital way to get your voice heard, to be a part of the conversation, to be able to actively, work with people, for instance, from Tennessee on doing advocacy, which I know AMCD has reached out to do, along with many other divisions, LGBT included, CSJ. And so I do think that there's an opportunity for us to reacquaint ourselves with each other and to join divisions that are in line with our personal beliefs as counselors under an umbrella, as opposed to kind of one-offing into our own discussions, kind of having a core of leadership to work with, I think is important.
So just for our presenters, we did get a request from somebody on the chat if you'd be willing to share your contact info. If so, I'd ask that you just kind of type that into the chat box when you get a chance. We also got a message from Michael Hutchins that BSJ and LGBT are forming a task force to work with ACA and TCA. So if you're interested in that, I'm sure that they'd be open to having some folks collaborate. We also got a question, and I'm sorry, it's a whole bunch of kind of names. I don't know exactly what your name is, but the question was related back to ACA pulling out of Nashville for 2017, and wanting to know from the panel if you're able to speak to any potential benefits that we're seeing for not being in Nashville.
ACA made the decision to pull out of Nashville based on member input. And it was a very difficult decision that was made, and Governing Council had several very long calls to discuss the input from members. As I mentioned previously, we sent out a survey and had a remarkable response. And the majority of people wanted ACA to move. One of the things that some people indicated is that they did not feel safe, that they believed that they would not be safe. We recognize that Nashville is a dot of blue within a sea of red, and that it is a very welcoming city, but we need to be responsive to our members. So it was a very hard decision. And as many of you know, there are penalties when one breaks contracts this close to a conference. So the decision could potentially cost ACA hundreds of thousands of dollars to move the conference, but we do want to be responsive to the wishes of the majority and to respect Governing Council's decision. So it was made very clear that people wanted the conference moved to a city in a blue state, and where they would feel safe. And so that is what Meeting Services is looking at. A number of cities have applied to be the host for the conference, and we're hoping that a decision will be made within about the next week and a half. So I know that that's everybody is sort of waiting to see where we will be, but it's difficult less than a year out to sort of be uprooted and move. And it was a toss. We understood that there was value in staying and making a statement about staying that would represent those people who are potentially experiencing discrimination, and that we would be staying up for them. But on the other hand, the conference is a year out and people have very short memories, and to go to Nashville and to make a stand and to march or participate in political discussions or to do something else might not have the impact a year from now that pulling out does.
It's a lot easier to speak when you've got your microphone unmuted, as it turns out. But as we're coming to the end of our time together, I want to make sure our panelists have an opportunity to share any final thoughts or anything we may have missed on this conversation. So please feel free to jump in.
Oh, well, I want to thank everyone for the opportunity for us to have this discussion. I also I put my information on the chat if anyone would like to have further discussion. I certainly welcome that. I want to emphasize that a CERVIC has had numerous conversations about the Conscious Clause legislation, about the issues in Tennessee, about moving the conference. And I think all the divisions and branches and ACA would agree that these decisions and statements are not made lightly, that there's a considerable amount of thought and intention that goes into these, and that there's a lot of feedback that's needed from our membership, and that essentially decisions have to be made. So, speaking on behalf of a CERVIC, none of these decisions have been made lightly, and we have been very intentional about the statements and the decisions that we've made. So thank you very much.
I ditto the remarks from Stephanie. I am very thankful to each one of you that has co-presented with us today. All I can say is to the entire group, you all have been a shoulder to lean on, a cheerleader, and just all around awesome throughout this total experience. So I value each one of you. I appreciate you. I appreciate everyone that had the time to join us today. This is something we have to stand strong on. And regardless of the decision to be in Tennessee or not, at least like Dr. Eisen said, it opened the door up for conversations and also for advocacy, which is going to be needed not only for this legislation, but future legislation. So at least now we have it at hand. We can stand united and we can try to support each other. And TCA thanks all of you.
I'll just say that it is such a pleasure to be a new professor and a member of AMCD. It's been a whirlwind year, and for whatever reason, it feels like it continues to pick up dust. And so I say I want to be a counselor educator, and I believe in social justice and advocacy. And so this year has given me lots of opportunity to put my advocacy in the forefront. And I look forward to working with members of this panel and members of the profession as we move forward. So we've only just begun. So thank you.
And I add my thanks to those of everyone else. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of the panel, and thank you to my panel mates for all of their wisdom and insightful comments. And thank you, Carlos, for organizing this and making this happen. And we are there to help.
Mm-hmm.
Again, thank you everybody for being in attendance. We should definitely give thanks to Tiffany Gonzalez from AMCD, who initiated this process, and along with Katharina Chang and the great leaders at the association for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender Issues in Counseling, the Association for Spiritual, Ethical and Religious Values in Counseling, the Tennessee Counseling Association, and especially the American Counseling Association for help sponsoring this event. Thank you all very much. I hope you have a great rest of your day. We will be making a recording of this available shortly. Thank you very much.
Bye.